This is Rob Tubbett for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. Delighted to be joined here on the phone by Shelly Finkel, manager of Deontay Wilder. Shelly, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you, and hopefully you're feeling better.
I'm slowly getting there. It was quite the week in New York last week, so let's just start there and work our way through. Anthony Joshua, shock defeat to Andy Ruiz. Just your thoughts?
I was surprised, although I knew Andy was a real fighter, and I thought that Joshua was a little cautious the first two rounds, and then in the third, when he dropped him, he rushed in and got hit, and that is something that is hopefully they'll work on. I believe it'll be a great fight if the rematch happens, as I've been reading, because I think that Ruiz will have more confidence in himself, and I think Joshua will prepare better. So, everyone will be looking forward to a great fight later in the year.
Now, obviously, without knowing the full facts of the events, there was a lot of talk, as you know better than anybody, in the week building up to the fight about who Anthony would fight after Andy Ruiz. How much of that do you think played a factor in his performance?
I really don't know. It's hard when you don't know the person individually and know his idiosyncrasies like all of us have. So I can only do it from a distance and have no idea really.
It seemed to me like Anthony, as you mentioned, being cautious in the first couple of rounds, it seemed to me like he wasn't quite himself. Now, a lot of the rumours have surfaced about potentially being hurt in sparring the week before. Did you notice anything on his ring walk or before the bell that you potentially picked up on?
Well, when I saw him go into the ring, it seemed as though he was very relaxed. He was looking all around and, just getting his bearings. But once the fight started, I kept saying to myself, why is he pouring with his jab rather than being a stiff jab against Ruiz? So I was surprised with that a bit. Then when he dropped Ruiz in the third for a second, because it was very quick that he got dropped, I said, oh, there it is. And then the tables turned, and a bit of a surprise, not like a shock, like when Lennox Lewis and Rockman, something like that. This was a surprise, but not a shock, like, oh my God.
What was going through your mind? We've briefly mentioned this already. What was going through your mind as somebody who had a vested interest in, a massive undisputed world title fight between Deontay and Anthony? It's been heavily discussed. How does this impact on your thinking?
Well, my mind during a fight is only on the fight. I look at every part of that fight to see, because he may be the opponent still until it was over. So, I noticed he got hurt with a body shot. I noticed he was pouring with his jab. So these were all things that I was taking into my thinking. And that was it. Then the fight obviously went the other way and was over. And then I have to, in the case of Joshua and of Ruiz, be on the sidelines, do my thing with Deontay, and which I'm very glad we did, because it would have been a real mess if we were signed to a deal to fight Joshua next, and there was no Joshua, because it would have been for the belts, and he doesn't have them.
Just talk to me about that, because in the week building up to the fight, we saw Deontay announce not one but two fights with Luis Ortiz, and then, as I understand it, next year Tyson Fury. What was your thinking in that, getting that done, particularly on Joshua Fight Week? What was your thinking behind that?
I felt that we had to set our agenda. We have to worry about what's best in our opinion as a team, Deontay being the leader of that team, myself and Al and Jay being his advisors, giving him all the facts, and then making the decisions of what's best for him. And luckily it turned out what we were doing is definitely what was best for him.
Now, we've spoken already about the Tyson-Fury rematch being, well, can you confirm that it has actually been signed for next year?
It has been.
Does Andy Ruiz holding the rest of the titles, essentially, does that change, or could that possibly change your plans? Would you be willing to pursue an undisputed title fight with Andy Ruiz should he come through Anthony Joshua in the rematch?
Well, first, Deontay would have to beat Ortiz, and to beat Fury for that to happen, I'm not in the habit of doing a contract and trying to get out of it. So we have a commitment with... Oh, 1 second, I'm sorry. Hello? I am feeling a little better. I'm on an interview. Let me call you right back. Hi. The thing is, we have an agreement to fight Fury next after Luis Ortiz. I can't look past Ortiz, as Joshua obviously couldn't look past Ruiz.
The fight with Tyson, as I understand, well, he's boxing Tom Schwartz in next weekend in Las Vegas. As I understand it, he's looking at a September date for an in-between fight. Is it normal for fights to be arranged so far in advance? I know that was one of the sticking points initially in one of the many negotiations with yourself and Eddie Hearn over the Joshua Wilder fight.
I don't remember that being an issue with us, but no, and it would be better if there were more of that so that people could see a plan, they could see things unfolding, and they know if everything goes okay on June 15th and it goes okay with Ortiz, that the Fury fight should happen in the first quarter or so of next year.
Now, I know you've said that you did the deals with Deontay's best interests at heart, which is obviously what you're going to do, being his representative. But it seems to me like it would have been more prudent to wait for the outcome of the Ruiz fight before potentially entering in negotiations with Anthony Joshua. Why didn't you do that?
Why would I? Then I might lose Fury.
Right. I mean, I think some of the naysayers would have pointed to the fact that you and potentially Bob Arum and the other heavyweights in the division were looking to essentially freeze Anthony Joshua out. Was that ever a part of your thinking?
No, but it's a part of what happens. Joshua was very hard to make. Look, there was a time when we were obsessed with making that fight. And we were horsed around and played to the media like we didn't want it. We offered $50 million. We were willing to take 15, and that passed. And once that passed, then he went with Povetkin. We said, we got to make our own plans and not worry about Joshua. Let him make his own plans. Eventually that fight will happen, and it'll be enormous. And if he redeems himself with Ruiz, it'll still be enormous. And in the meantime, Deontay is building his reputation and building his status. And yesterday, ESPN said he's the number one heavyweight. And that's what we want to build. And hopefully Joshua redeems himself. If not, it'll be very nice to fight Ruiz.
You mentioned the fight will still be enormous if Anthony comes past Andy Ruiz in the rematch. It would seem to me like no matter how big it is, it's still not going to be as big as it could have been. Is that right?
How do we know that? I mean, the biggest fight ever was Pacquiao and Mayweather. And Pacquiao was starched by
Marquez.
You know, so... people want to see fights. And if Joshua redeems himself in the way, he hopes he does, then it could be the same. And if not, then it wasn't meant to be the same.
With Anthony taking such a devastating loss, I mean, we've mentioned Lewis versus Rackman. I mean, a lot of people have pointed to Lewis versus McCall. They were one-punch knockouts. This is something rather different. With him taking such a loss like that, it seems to me like negotiations could be even more complicated, or it could make the deal even more difficult to do between yourselves and Anthony's team going forward, with him now not being an unbeaten fighter. Would that be accurate?
That depends on Eddie. Look, when we wanted the fight with Fury, the difference in match rooms, attitude, and hours was we want the fight with Fury, the first one. So we paid what we believed was more than we should have. But we didn't debate on that because that was the right fight to build Deontay's career. And all the time, Joshua and Eddie are of the mindset, we'll give you this. Look, you could be in Wembley. We're offering you. Stop offering us. Sit down and make a fight. You know, we don't want your offers. We can carry our own share. And I told that to Eddie. He agreed. And that was just before the fight with Canelo at the Garden in December. And the next day, Joshua was in New York. He said, well, I've offered him everything. Don't offer us. All the money that's in a pot, you put on the table, and you figure out how to divide it. Not you own the pot and you're giving us. That day is over. And now it may even be the reverse. But first, let's see what happens with Joshua in his rematch with Ruiz and Deontay's fight with Fury.
No, I appreciate we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but should Anthony Joshua lose the rematch to Andy Ruiz, would that kill any possibility of Joshua versus Wilder?
No. That doesn't mean his career is over. It depends on, his mindset. And does he want to continue? There have been a lot of great fighters like Lennox Lewis, who is a great fighter. He lost several fights. It happens. Holyfield, Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali. I mean, it happens. But the question is, do you come back or do you want to quit?
What was Deontay's thoughts about the fight? Deontay, I know, came out and raised a few eyebrows with some of his tweets. Was that just frustration at the situation over the past 18 months?
A little bit of that, and a little bit of he was disappointed that he felt that Joshua quit after all of, the bravado, and that I'm this and I'm the man, and a bit of frustration, I guess. But, that's what I think it was.
I mean, a lot of talk has been about the end of the fight. Some people are saying that Anthony Joshua did quit. Others are saying that he didn't. What's your view on it?
Oh, I don't know what quit means. He didn't want to fight anymore. That night, he was in the corner there. He didn't give the ref any reason for the ref to let him continue.
Going back to Andy Ruiz.
Wait, do you agree?
I do agree, actually. I believe that he was hurt in the fight. I don't believe he consciously quit the fight. I believe that he had been hurt in the third round, and I don't really think he knew where he was at any moment after that, which led him to finish the fight, really, no matter what way you look at it. That's my thought on it.
Okay.
Going back to Andy Ruiz, it's the first time we've had a world heavyweight champion of Mexican origin or Mexican descent. How big of a deal is that in boxing?
I think that's an added on. The big thing was this fellow who looks out of shape but can fight, which I knew he could, won that night and scored probably the biggest upset in heavyweight history since Buster Douglas beat Tyson.
Do you believe that Andy Ruiz winning that will because I think a lot of fans are kind of upset that, regardless of kind of what you say or Eddie says, they feel like the glamour has been taken off a potential fight between Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua, a fight that could have happened for all the belts, with both men's undefeated records on the line. Do you think the fact that this has happened will force people's arms to take these fights earlier, regardless of who's at fault, but just to make the fights sooner?
No. If you're doing what you think is the right career path for your fighter, no. They didn't want the fight. When Joshua goes public and says, get me $50 million, I'll sign tomorrow, and you come up with it, and you go up with all excuses, well, we didn't know that they had it. Al or I have been involved with fights that were bigger than this, and never have either one of us defaulted on a payment. So it was an excuse. And if it was, okay, the contract's here, let me sign it, put it in escrow, put up the money, we would have done that. They didn't want the fight at the time. Then they tried to humiliate us with $15 million flat. And we said yes. And they said, you waited too long. The BA said, we have to fight Povetkin. But it came out later, the BA would have accepted a unification and waited. So that was Eddie's choice, and that was his team's choice. Maybe they didn't feel he was ready for Deontay. Maybe they had another motive. I don't know. But that was their choice, and I have to respect it. It doesn't matter if you like it or not, but you have to respect it because you have no choice.
Now, you mentioned Al Heyman. Andy Ruiz is a PBC fighter. Deontay Wilder is a PBC fighter. We've seen Al in the past advise fighters such as Peter Quillen to vacate titles. Do you think there's any possibility of Al suggesting to Andy Ruiz not to take the rematch? Or it seems to me, at the minute, at least, that PBC holds all of the marbles in the heavyweight division. Do you expect the rematch to take place?
As long as Joshua wants it this year, it will happen.
Okay, well, Shelly, I think we're about there. If there's anything that you'd like to add before we go?
No. You satisfied with everything?
I'm absolutely satisfied. Thank you very much.
No problem. You have a nice day.
Okay, Shelly. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks.